So, like, if you know the solar system, America is, like, in the middle, and, England is, like, it's the closest to the sun, I think.
Oh, I could spend an entire day talking about how annoying this is, and if anything, just confirms that of the Brexit team when regarding Project Fear. I love the quotations around that as well, as if it was anything but fearmongery. Bad tactics, guys, that's why you lost. Anyway, today we are going to be discussing something I never thought we'd actually discuss on this channel. It was something I noticed on Twitter when someone pointed out that finally false rape accusers were finally getting convicted, but only seem to be happening in the United Kingdom. This is further supported by an article by BuzzFeed, which upon reading indicated to me that they made it seem as if it was a bad thing someone was being prosecuted for falsifying a claim of rape, which is a very serious crime. For the most part, a number of male victims, and I say the male victims of this false accusation. Remember, women can't rape in this country unless they organise a gangbang. Their names are dragged through the mud, their reputations tarnished. It is something that sticks to you for the rest of your life, because for the most part, anonymity is not something that is granted to both sides until a conviction has finally been given. So with that all said, we are going to be addressing an article on BuzzFeed. Something I thought had died after 2016. We all know they were beat the fuck off the internet, certainly when it came to videos, because they put out so many disingenuous, insulting videos that attacked white people, and let's face it, they were utterly obliterated by the anti-SJW, anti-feminist crowd, or should we just all call them the skeptic community? Perhaps that would be simpler. Anyway, vulnerable women are routinely prosecuted and imprisoned for false rape claims in the UK. It's not uncommon for judges to call these women wicked. One male judge said a convict had betrayed the sisterhood. I know they're in quotations for a reason, but at the same time, is there anything inherently wrong with calling someone who tries to drag someone's name through the mud and destroy them, utterly destroy them, wicked? And for betraying the good name of other women, although I don't really care for the sisterhood much like I don't particularly care for the brotherhood. I have a feeling my membership's about to get revoked. The rape case against Rhiannon Brooker's ex-partner had fallen apart. Rhiannon had accused him of assaulting her numerous times over a 2-year period, but detectives found discrepancies in her story shortly after they arrested him, so prosecutors dropped the charges. Elsewhere around the world, that would have likely been the end of it. Not in Britain. Oh dear, how ominous. Instead, one afternoon in January 2012, police in Bristol, a city in southwest England, called the 28-year-old back to the station for another interview. Rhiannon thought the purpose of the meeting was to bolster the case against her ex. Police were indeed trying to make a case against her. Well, it seems reasonable that if they are unable to secure a prosecution of the formerly accused, they would then seek to prosecute the person that has wasted their time, if at all possible. Perjury, lying, wasting police resources, time, there are charges for all of this. What Rhiannon didn't know, as she answered the detective's questions, was that she was now suspect of perverting the course of justice by fabricating her allegations. The crime carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. Just to be clear, while that is quite the sentence, for the most part people are not sentenced to that. And certainly in this case, with the recent discovery that non-violent crimes will be treated a certain way, you can imagine this would be nothing more than a glorified suspended sentence and community order, possibly in ASBO, if that still exists. British authorities are supposed to exercise extreme caution when deciding whether to prosecute someone for lying about rape, especially if the person is vulnerable or if it is unclear whether the accusation was made maliciously. Rhiannon ticked many of those boxes. She told police that she had an abusive childhood, so naturally she'd want to get back at somebody by lying, right, and maliciously looking then to abuse someone with the law as her weapon. What a fantastically bitchy way of going about things. As investigators considered charging Rhiannon, one voiced a concern that had nothing to do with the evidence against her. Documents seen by BuzzFeed News show there was a reputational risk to the police if her ex made a complaint or went to the media. Oh, so optics stopped you. Okay. When the recording light went on in the interview room, detectives told Rhiannon that prosecutors just wanted to clarify some material. They told her it was all completely standard. Hopefully, they said, she wouldn't have to come back again. Rhiannon told BuzzFeed News that the questions they asked were, by now, familiar. Why didn't she report her ex-partner earlier? I didn't want him to get arrested. Now this all ends with Rhiannon getting a criminal record, to which she is now considered unemployable and branded a liar. I am resisting the urge to outright state that you should have gone to the police sooner. Oh wait, I've just done it. You should have. I can understand why some people, when they feel a certain way about some people, feel reluctant to do it. But understand this, if he broke the law, he must be tried and prosecuted and sentenced for that, for he is a criminal. You delaying only enabled him, and you allowed some false sense of love guilt you into silence. And I say false sense because he took your trust and abused it. Because of that, the police perceived you to be a liar, and there was too much evidence on that side. Now, much like those that are falsely accused of rape, people who are then falsely labelled a liar of being a victim of rape are tarnished because they are publicly shamed. But I want to focus on this and the article's perception. I want to focus on the way the article is trying to play how we treat those that falsify rape claims. Because I think this is important. You've taken a very weak story to play a certain card and make it seem as if it is bad the United Kingdom prosecutes those that commit these crimes. Now, to be clear, we don't hear much of these. We don't hear about it in the UK because it's not reported. We hear about those that have been raped, if it's by a white man. We don't hear about it when it is a Pakistani grooming gang that use something called a shag wagon, to the point where I have to rely on Breitbart for a source, because the United Kingdom is burying Muslim grooming gangs, which is quite sickening, really. A BuzzFeed News investigation has found out that UK authorities are exceptionally aggressive in pursuing women for lying about rape, prosecuting hundreds over the past decade. While it is within their right, you have been caught wasting police time. Granted, some are accidental, some are like this case you have used as an example. Not all are like this. There are a number that are malicious. Last year there was one that falsified rape against many men and claimed she was a lesbian even though she had a boyfriend. I would argue she was totally unfuckable, and I think that should be used as evidence to prove that no one raped her, because I don't think any straight man would knowingly want to have sex with her in the first place. The Crown Prosecution Service, the state prosecutor for England and Wales, has even written rules for whom to target and when, something other Western countries don't do, experts say. Perhaps they should. The policy is meant to restrain law enforcement from going after people who did not make it clear and malicious accusations, those who are young or mentally ill, and those who have experienced past abuse. I would argue that you should, but it has to be done very carefully, especially with the last one, because somebody who has experienced past abuse sometimes then doles out abuse on other people. This is something that has been proven. For example, those who have abused children have them themselves been abused as a child, which makes zero sense to me in the first place, but it is something that happens nonetheless. But BuzzFeed News today exposes how prosecutors routinely fail to follow these rules as they send vulnerable women to prison. Right. Our investigation can reveal at least 200 women in the UK have been prosecuted for lying about being raped in the past decade, according to a BuzzFeed News analysis of press reports. Most of these women were sent to prison, dozens of them with sentences of 2 or more years. Good. Prosecutors went after teenagers and women who reportedly had mental health issues. Don't they all have mental health issues? It's certainly the scapegoat used to stop prosecuting women who are actually criminals, had experienced past physical and sexual assault, or were grappling with drug and alcohol addiction, all of which can be easily translated to men, but nobody seems to care about that. Women were prosecuted even when they reportedly went to police only under pressure, quickly recanted, or never named their attacker at all. I'm not sure what to say to this. The CPS has prosecuted women who police were not sure had lied. One instance, detectives declined to charge the woman for making a false complaint. Prosecutors went ahead anyway. Well, that's because the prosecutors then felt they had enough evidence to get a conviction. That is their purpose after all. Yvette Cooper, Labour MP and chair of the influential Home Affairs Committee, described BuzzFeed News' investigation as very troubling and called on the CPS to make sure the guidance is followed so that victims are not deterred from coming forward and vulnerable women are not inappropriately prosecuted. I actually don't care. I'll agree circumstance plays a part in whether or not one should pursue a conviction against someone who has falsified the claim of rape, but as it exists, and the police are well within their rights to investigate, if a charge can be placed upon someone, they should definitely pursue it. But I must make it clear, it has to be means assessed, which has been pointed out when it comes to dealing with mental health issues, younger people. It is definitely means assessed. It should be treated as such. So I'm not being a total dick. Britain's approach stands in stark contrast to that of the US, Australia, Canada, and other European countries. That is a poorly phrased sentence, because neither the US, Australia, and Canada are a part of Europe yet. Women in these countries do not typically face prosecution, yet they should, let alone prison, for lying about rape, state prosecutors and experts said because it's not considered to be in the public interest. Bollocks, is it? I think if you show that people cannot simply maliciously make up stories to suit their agenda and look to actively harm other people, tear them down perhaps, then people will be less inclined to go out of their way to lie. There are statistics on the number of rapes that happen in your country. There is also a statistic for the number of those that are falsified. Granted, it is a small number, but it is still a number. It still exists, and therefore must be treated as such. It must be dealt with. Innocent people are then being dragged into something they had nothing to do with. A spokesperson for the CPS told BuzzFeed News that it prosecutes very few cases of false rape complaints, and this should not dissuade rape victims from coming forward to report their assault. Now, this article continues on for quite some time, and it just goes through absolute bollocks, to the point where it basically tries to make it seem as if the United Kingdom is bad for prosecuting those who have falsified a claim, but used Rhiannon Brooker as an example to base their claims. That is intellectually dishonest, because I can, off the top of my head, and I have already done it, have mentioned false rape claims that have come from those who are malicious. Therefore, you are using your example to morally grandstand about the negatives because of an isolated incident. And I would argue, with those that are unfortunate enough to be then prosecuted when they are not a liar, I'm not going to try and compare it to that of those who have been falsely accused of rape. They are vastly different, but because they centre around the accusation of rape, there is some similarity. And as such, both must be treated very carefully, which is why I fully support absolute anonymity in rape cases until a conviction has been obtained. Because in a lot of rape cases in this country, and I said this earlier, the supposed perpetrator, which is always the man, because remember, our rape laws are bullshit, his name will be dragged through the mud. Let's use an example. Ched Evans, the football player, sentenced to, I think, 5 years in prison, served 2.5, and a few years later managed to, on appeal, prove his innocence. Considering his very public profile, his career was almost destroyed, but he has rebuilt it. There were famous people like Jessica Ennis saying he was abhorrent, and her name should be removed from the stand at the club he used to play for if he ever re-signed. Well, if memory serves, he now plays for that team again, because he's innocent, and I don't recall Jessica Ennis ever apologising to him. But the damage was done, let's face it. A few years of his life in a prison for a false claim, and I don't recall the actual falsifying bitch getting sentenced for it. So we know it is a case that the police don't usually deal with much of it, even though that was definitely one of those instances where she should have gone to fucking prison. Anyway, I hope everyone has a lovely Tuesday, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, goddowns. Imagine my shock